often history is focused on great events and people. Wars, kings, constitutions, marches. The specific points that define the modern world. When history is assumed through this lens, then the important concepts which flow through human culture are often taken for granted, simply as a tool to record and implement the changes brought by these great events. Writing has enabled humanity to remember these events, the people, places, and things which changed our world, both for the better and worse. Through these records, historians are able to determine how events occurred and what people throughout time wanted through reading letters, government records, and literary sources. Writing developed independently at least 4 times over the past 5,000 years, and nearly every language which exists in the modern world has been written in some form, either by the native speakers or those trying to study these languages. Over 3 videos, I'll be focusing on the materials that humanity has written on, from the first cuneiform tablets fired in ancient Babylon to how the modern paper industry produces over 400 million metric tons of paper each year, over 450 times the weight of the Golden Gate Bridge. I hope you'll be able to follow along with me as I discuss the physical materials used for writing, focusing on the papers and solid objects carved into or drawn on, rather than the inks themselves. And I hope that by the end, you'll be able to better see the almost universal human need to write, whether that be to handle business, to communicate with family and friends, or even to journal for themselves. This is For much of the modern era, historians and archaeologists believed that writing in all forms emerged from a single source. However, with the discovery of writing systems within the Americas and advancement of studies regarding historical writing, we now believe that there are actually 4 locations that writing developed: Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica. The oldest of these systems was developed in what is now modern-day Iraq and is known as cuneiform. Cuneiform was written using a reed stylus, carved to leave notches in wet clay tablets. Cuneiform is a system of writing that lasted for thousands of years, from about 3500 BC, with the last known tablet being created approximately 75 AD. After this point, the system of cuneiform fell completely out of use and was forgotten until archaeological digs in the 19th and 20th centuries began to uncover more and more of these tablets. Most cuneiform tablets were written by specialized workers known as scribes, who were tasked with writing, reading, and maintaining a majority of these tablets, as even some educated members of society were illiterate in the early days of writing. These tablets were used primarily for recording government transactions such as providing receipts for tax records, for counting large numbers of grain and valuable goods, and the movement of people between places. However, as the centuries progressed, cuneiform began to be used for a variety of purposes, and tablets were often used to record recipes, poems, and even great literary works such as the Epic of Gilgamesh. Currently, there are about 500,000 cuneiform tablets located in different museums and collections around the world. This means that there are more current examples of cuneiform clay tablets than any other writing medium I'll be covering today. The reason for this is threefold. The first is that these clay tablets were relatively cheap and commonly used by people from all walks of life to record vital information. The second is that they were used for over 3,000 years. This is a period of time longer than any other everyday writing surface, including paper, has been used. Third is the fact that clay, unlike organic material, is not destroyed when fire is applied to it, but becomes solidified and stronger. Before its firing, clay is extremely fragile and can be dissolved in water alone. However, after being fired, it hardens and retains its shape even when holding liquid. The ancient Mesopotamians recognized this and intentionally baked the most important tablets, thus preserving them. This fact of clay also applied in the event of an accidental firing. An unkept cooking fire or even arson might cause a building to collapse, preventing recovery by those who wrote the tablets, but preserving them into the modern day. However, clay tablets were not the only way that clay was used for writing. One method that was used throughout the Mediterranean, Greece, and the Roman Empire was Ostracon. Ostracon were broken pottery shards, used most often for short messages, but also used for personal notes, handwriting practice, voting, and even as reusable tickets in the Roman Colosseums. Ostracon are considered to be one of the most important pieces for understanding everyday aspects of life in much of the ancient world, due to their cheap price, common usage, disposable nature, and durability compared to lighter materials like papyrus. Although Ostracon were made from broken pottery shards, it's unlikely that pottery was made specifically to be broken, but instead, as ceramics broke, The pieces were used almost like scratch paper is used today, rather than simply being thrown out. The earliest known examples of Ostracon date to the late 7th century BC, and they become increasingly common in the 6th century BC, especially in Athens. By the 5th century BCE, it's estimated that more than 30,000 Ostracon were produced annually in Athens alone, just for voting. The practice of voting by Ostracon continued into the 2nd century BCE and eventually spread to the other Greek city-states. The vast majority of Ostracon that have been found are inscribed with the names of men, although a few women's names have also been found. It's not known exactly why this is the case, but it's possible that rarely women were able to participate in the political process, or they were less likely to own property that could be used as collateral for loans. Although Ostracon were commonly made out of pottery shards, there are a small number of stone Ostracon that were found as well. The stone Ostracon are usually made of limestone or marble and were used by the ancient Greeks in highly contentious elections and also by ancient Egyptian scribes to practice their drawing. The study of Ostracon can provide many important insights into the social, political, and economic history of ancient Greece. For example, the names that are found on Ostracon can help identify the social networks of the people who lived in that time period, shedding light on the daily lives of the lower classes who largely lacked written records. However, one source which presents a significant amount of detail about the laws, ideologies, and great people throughout history are steles, sometimes known as steles. Generally, a stele is any large monument that is taller than it is wide, and has some sort of a relief or written words carved into it. Because of this general definition, steles could be considered to be the oldest writing medium, as examples of carved pictographs can be found on examples of steles that were carved before writing, pottery, and even widespread agriculture were discovered. Many carved steles, albeit without writing, can be found at Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known settlement. However, the earliest examples of steles with writing can be dated to roughly the same time that writing was developed in Egypt and Mesopotamia, and modern examples are still being created and publicly viewed. When discussing steles, it's important to keep a few things in mind. First and foremost, steles, even in the modern day, are intended to be public-facing, commemorating a specific individual or event, or standardizing a set of rules or laws. Second, while many steles are often made out of stone, examples can also be found made of wood, metal, and other materials which could rot, rust, or burn, meaning that there are likely many historical examples which have decayed over time. Finally, as they've been erected in some form by nearly every established civilization, we will be limiting discussion to a few of the most prominent examples to prevent oversimplification. One of the most important examples of a stele is that of the Rosetta stone. Originally carved in 196 BCE, the Rosetta stone was unearthed in 1799 CE during Napoleon's military invasion of Egypt. To gather support from the French elite, Napoleon insisted that the primary purpose of the expedition was for science and humanitarian reasons, rather than for military conquest, and brought thousands of artists, historians, and scientists, whose efforts founded the basis of modern Egyptology. The Rosetta Stone enabled direct translations of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics due to the fact that it was commissioned in 3 languages to address the diverse ancient population of the time. Those languages were Ancient Egyptian Hieroglyphics, Ancient Greek, and Demotic Script, which was the standard Egyptian language at the time. Through the knowledge of the ancient Greek language, still taught in many academies during the 19th century, the inscriptions on the stone provided extensive insights into the decipherment of the hieroglyphics. The decipherment of the hieroglyphics was a long and difficult process. It was not until the 1830s that scholars in France made significant progress into deciphering them by comparing the 3 scripts. The decipherment of the hieroglyphics has given us a better understanding of ancient Egyptian culture and history, and the inscriptions on the stone tell us about the relationship between Egypt and the ancient Greek world. The Rosetta Stone is one of the most significant archaeological finds and has been on display at the British Museum in London continuously for over 220 years and remains one of the most popular exhibits to this day. Nearly 1,000 years later, we can find hundreds of examples of steles across Scandinavia. Viking runestones were frequently used to memorialize deceased individuals, with many stories containing information about the deceased's family and their accomplishments. Runestone inscriptions also contained information about the person who erected the stone and the event or person it was commemorating. The vast majority of runestones date from the Viking Age, between 800 and 1050 CE, though a small number of earlier examples have also been found. The use of runestones began to decline in the 12th century CE as Christianity became more prevalent in Scandinavia, forcing changes to the local culture and religious beliefs. While the word runestone is used to refer to both the stone itself and the inscription carved into it, the word runic refers to the alphabet used to carve the inscription, which is known as the futhark. The futhark consists of 24 characters, most of which represent a single sound and are used almost exclusively on these runestones. There are three main types of runestones: memorial stones, boundary stones, and curse stones. Memorial stones were the most common type of runestone and used to commemorate deceased individuals. Boundary stones were used to mark the boundaries of property, often either for a village or for important areas with ritualistic purpose. And finally, curse stones were used to curse somebody who had committed a crime within a specific place, often to mixed results. Runestones were usually carved from granite and were typically below 5 feet tall, but the largest were over twice that size. The inscriptions were carved using a chisel, and then the stone was raised into place in prominent locations, such as the entrance to a farm or the crossroads of a village, or even carved directly onto boulders already within those locations. One of the most well-known runestones is the rock runestone. The rock runestone is about 8 feet tall and weighs about 5 tons. It was originally carved in the 9th century CE and later used for the building material of a Christian church, where it was rediscovered in the church wall in the 1800s. The stone contains the longest pre-Christian runic inscription and is considered to be the first Swedish literary inscription ever created. Finally, the discussion of steles would be incomplete without mentioning the hundreds erected by the Mayan peoples throughout Central America. Between 400 BCE and 900 CE, an entire professional class developed dedicated to stele production, with professional stone carvers rivaling those of ancient Egypt. Many of the steles contain reliefs of both mythological elements and political figures, such as kings and major players within the aristocracy. They also contain short and written descriptions in Mayan hieroglyphics. Most of the descriptions declare the importance of the king and his retinue, or mark a period of time being passed, either a major period on the Mayan calendar or through the stage of the king's life. These pieces were also considered to be important to ensure the political control of an area, and these steles would often be moved to new locations to establish this control. As conquests occurred and dynasties changed, these steles would also be ritualistically destroyed and replaced to publicly display the change in political power. One of the most important pieces of Mayan steles is the numerous hieroglyphics that surrounded the reliefs. Through these, we've not only been able to decipher the Mayan language, considered to be the only complete writing system in Mesoamerica, but the Mayan numeral system as well. Three of the most famous examples of a Mayan stele are the Yaxchilian lintels 24, 25, and 26, carved around 725 CE. These three lintels depict the Mayan king Shield Jaguar and his main consort Lady Zoc. When viewed together, they show Lady Zoc performing a bloodletting ritual by pulling a thorned rope through her tongue, using the blood to communicate with the dead and with gods, and finally assisting Jaguar's shield in preparing for battle, presenting him with his armor. Through these lintels and their hieroglyphics, we are able to get a rare glimpse into the role that royal women played in the Mayan. One of the most ingenious, non-traditional examples of writing comes from the Quechua people who lived in the Incan Empire, now in modern-day Peru. Quipus were lengths of knotted rope developed to fill the missing need for writing systems within the empire. The ropes were dyed and knotted in specific ways to represent census numbers, the history of regions and royals, and even astronomical data. While the quipu is not the only example of knotted ropes functioning as a writing system, as examples can be found in parts of East Asia, it is one of the most well-known examples. After the Spanish conquest of the Incan Empire in the 16th century, nearly all examples were destroyed, and most of the 600 examples still existing today were hidden away in safe areas, made after the Spanish conquest, or were discovered in pre-Columbian burial sites. Because of this systematic destruction of these records, our knowledge of the Quechua peoples in the Incan Empire are limited to archaeological evidence, oral tradition, and Spanish records, whose writers often lack the cultural context through which these indigenous societies operated to effectively relay what they observed. This lack of knowledge has no doubt contributed to the many conspiracy theories that have gathered steam over the years regarding the cultural advancement of people in Central and South America. The ancient aliens theory that cultures in Central and South America were simply not advanced enough to design complex social structures allowing advanced road building and architecture heavily relies on the fact that we simply don't have the written records to support the human ingenuity needed to build these things, even though similar structures and systems were being built in Europe during the same time periods. These sources of clay, stone, and rope have been invaluable in providing us with an understanding of the world and people who inhabited it thousands of years before us. However, it's only provided us a series of glimpses into the past, separated by decades and hundreds of miles, rather than how those regions and people were connected in detail. To understand that, we'll have to turn to the precursors of paper: parchment, papyrus, leaves, and bark. But those are subjects for another video. I'd just like to say thank you for watching this far. Making this video has just been a long and complicated process. I've spent so much time learning how to actually make a video and just put together the pieces, the video, the audio. Every single part of it has just been but now this is finally out. This is, I could really say, the first piece that I've done that actually looks semi-professional, and I can really I expect part 2 maybe in about a month to 2 months at the most, because now I know what I'm actually doing. I can sit down and not spend 4 hours trying to figure out how an online tool to make graphs work. As always, if you have any questions, you can feel free to let me know below in the comments, or you can email me with my contact info is below. I've also included a Patreon, which you can help support the channel if you like this video. I hope you learned something today, and if you'd like to learn further about the history of writing, there are some links below to other videos. And as always, I'm the Pop Historian.